I was sitting alone in my dimly lit kitchen at almost 11 p.m., fork hovering uselessly over a plate of cold leftover Chinese food, when I realized my marriage was already rotting, quietly, invisibly, and right under my nose. It should have been just another Tuesday. Nothing dramatic, nothing historic. The clock above the stove ticked loudly, each second landing like a tiny hammer against my ribs. The refrigerator hummed. The overhead light flickered faintly. Everything felt normal in that unsettling way things do right before they collapse. My instincts had been screaming at me for weeks. That tight feeling in my chest, the way Daniel had started coming home later, the way his phone never left his hand. I'd ignored it all, like unpaid bills, like warning lights you convince yourself will turn off on their own. At exactly 11:03 p.m., the front door unlocked. I didn't turn around at first. Then I heard his shoes. Not rushed, not hesitant, measured, controlled. Each step echoed down the hallway like it had been rehearsed in advance. When Daniel finally walked into the kitchen, he didn't look guilty. He looked prepared. He was wearing the charcoal coat he only put on when he wanted to feel powerful. The same one he wore the night he proposed, when he promised honesty, partnership, forever. The memory hit me so sharply I almost laughed. His eyes didn't meet mine. They floated just above my head, like I was furniture he hadn't decided whether to keep. He dropped his expensive briefcase onto the counter with a practiced sigh, leaned back slightly, and smirked. That smirk. The kind that doesn't belong to someone asking for forgiveness. "You know what happened tonight?" he said casually, like he was about to tell me our favorite show got canceled. I finally looked up. He didn't hesitate. "I slept with my boss," he said. Then, after a beat, "And honestly, I'd do it again." The kitchen went dead silent. No music, no traffic noise, no dramatic soundtrack. Just the sound of my own heartbeat, thudding so loudly I wondered if he could hear it. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my fork. I didn't cry. I kept chewing. Slowly. Each bite tasted like soy sauce, betrayal, and something inside me quietly snapping clean in half. Somewhere between bites 3 and 4, I felt the exact moment my marriage flatlined. And Daniel mistook my calm for weakness. That was his first mistake. Before Daniel became the man who could look me in the eye and confess infidelity like it was a career update, he was just Daniel, 38 years old, senior project manager at a mid-sized consulting firm, well-spoken, ambitious, charming in a controlled, calculated way, the kind of man my mother liked immediately. And me? I was 35. I worked in operations, logistics, systems, problem solving. I was the woman people called when things broke. Not glamorous, not flashy. Reliable, grounded. I liked structure. I liked plans. I liked knowing where my feet were planted. We met 7 years ago at a friend's engagement party. He spilled red wine on my dress. I laughed. He panicked. He insisted on replacing it. We talked for hours that night, about work, about future plans, about how neither of us believed in chaos disguised as romance. He said he admired how put together I was. I told him I admired that he seemed driven without being reckless. It felt balanced. We dated for 3 years before he proposed. Daniel proposed in a quiet restaurant, not flashy, no audience, just the two of us. He slid the ring across the table with hands that trembled just enough to look sincere. "I want a partner," he said. "Not drama, not games, you and me, same direction." I believed him. We married 6 months later. Our life was stable, predictable, comfortable. We bought a modest house, split expenses fairly, built routines, Sunday grocery shopping, Wednesday takeout, Friday movie nights we sometimes slept through. I didn't think stability was boring. I thought it was safety. Looking back now, the cracks were always there. I just didn't know how to read them yet. Daniel liked admiration. Not affection, admiration. He liked being praised. being noticed, being seen as impressive. At work, he thrived on it. At home, I didn't worship him. I respected him. I supported him. I assumed that was enough. When his boss, a woman in her 40s, sharp, confident, always impeccably dressed, started mentoring him closely, I didn't panic. Why would I? I trusted him. "She's tough," he said once, "but she sees potential." I smiled, encouraged him, asked about his projects. I didn't monitor his phone. I didn't question late nights. I didn't demand explanations, because trust was supposed to be mutual. His family adored him, especially his mother. She liked me, but in the way someone likes a functional appliance. Useful, quiet, dependable. "She keeps you grounded," she'd say. Not loving, not warm, just approving. I accepted it because I loved him. But over the last 6 months, things shifted. Daniel came home later, talked less, smiled at his phone more than he smiled at me. When I asked how his day was, his answers shortened. When I talked about mine, he listened like he was waiting for it to end. I told myself it was work stress. I told myself not to be insecure. I told myself marriages went through seasons. What I didn't realize was that while I was protecting our stability, Daniel was auditioning for a new audience. And the night he walked into that kitchen at 11:03 p.m., that wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was just the moment he finally stopped pretending. The strangest part wasn't the distance. It was how normal everything still looked. From the outside, our marriage appeared intact. We still ate dinner together most nights. We still shared weekend errands. We still slept in the same bed. But intimacy isn't measured by proximity. It's measured by presence. And Daniel was no longer present. He started keeping his phone face down on the table. Not aggressively, just casually enough to look innocent. His notifications were suddenly silenced. His password changed. When I asked about it, he shrugged. "Company policy," he said. "Security update." I accepted it. Because trusting someone you love feels easier than admitting something might be wrong. His boss's name came up more often. "She pushed back on my proposal today. She thinks I should aim higher. She says I'm underutilized." At first I felt proud. Someone believed in him. Then I noticed how his tone changed when he talked about her. More energy, more animation, more admiration. He started dressing better for work. New shirts, new cologne, clothes that hadn't existed in our closet before. "Trying to look professional," he said. I nodded. When he came home late, he always had a reason. Deadlines, strategy meetings, emergency revisions. Once I asked him, gently, if everything was okay between us. He looked surprised, almost offended. "Why wouldn't it be?" he asked. I didn't have a clean answer. Just a feeling. His family began shifting too. His mother stopped calling me directly. Messages went through Daniel instead. Invitations came last minute. At dinner one night, she said, "Work is important right now. You should be understanding." I always was. I learned not to ask too many questions, not to complain, not to need too much. Because women who need too much get labeled as difficult, and I didn't want to be difficult. What I didn't see then was that my silence wasn't preserving peace. It was creating space for someone else to step into. There were moments, small, dismissible moments, that should have stopped me cold, like the night he laughed at a message on his phone and turned away when I looked up, or the way he stopped touching me absent-mindedly, no hand on my back, no casual kisses. Or the way he started criticizing me. "You're always tired. You've changed. You're not very fun anymore." As if I'd done something wrong by growing steady instead of flashy. I tried harder, cooked more, asked more questions, listened better. But attention given out of fear never fills the gap. It just drains the giver. By the time that Tuesday night arrived, my body already knew the truth. My heart just hadn't caught up yet. And when Daniel finally said the words, "I slept with my boss," it wasn't shock, it was confirmation. The words didn't echo, they sank. I slept with my boss, and honestly, I'd do it again. Daniel said it without hesitation, without apology, without even lowering his voice, like he was reporting quarterly results, like it was a fact he'd simply been waiting to disclose. For a few seconds, my body forgot how to react. My fingers stayed wrapped around the fork. My jaw kept moving. My throat kept swallowing. It felt like my mind had been unplugged from my nervous system. I remember thinking, this is what shock feels like. Not screaming, not crying, just suspension. Daniel leaned back against the counter, arms crossing over his chest, watching me with thinly veiled anticipation. He wanted something from me. Anger, tears, hysteria, a performance. I didn't give him one. I took another bite of fried rice, chewed slowly, and nodded once. That nod wasn't forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. And somehow, that calm unnerved him. "You're not going to say anything?" he asked, frowning slightly. "Nothing at all?" I looked at him then. Really looked. The man I'd built a life with now stood in front of me like a stranger wearing his face. His eyes were sharp, defensive, his posture closed off. This wasn't remorse. This was justification waiting to be unleashed. "What would you like me to say?" I asked quietly. He scoffed. "I don't know, something. Don't you care?" I set my fork down carefully. "I care," I said. "I'm just listening." That was when his smirk widened. He mistook restraint for surrender. "You've been distant," he said, shifting tactics smoothly. "Always working, always tired. I needed to feel wanted again." There it was. The script. "You needed validation," I replied evenly. "So you chose infidelity." He shrugged. It wasn't planned. None of them ever are. My heartbeat was loud in my ears now. My palms felt cold. There was a tight pressure behind my eyes, but no tears came. "Not yet. You're not even upset," he said, irritation creeping in. "Most women would be losing it right now." I met his gaze steadily. "Most women haven't reached the moment where disappointment outweighs surprise." That stopped him. For half a second, I saw something flicker across his face. Uncertainty. Fear, maybe. Then he reached for his phone. "I need space," he muttered. "This conversation is going nowhere." He turned and walked down the hallway, leaving me sitting there under fluorescent light, with cold food and a marriage that had just been officially pronounced dead. The bedroom door slammed. Picture frames rattled, and that was when my body finally caught up. My chest tightened, not in panic, but in clarity. I wasn't spiraling. I was focusing. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the condensation sliding down my water glass, feeling something unexpected settle in my bones. Calm, not peace. Not acceptance. Calm like the eye of a storm. Because in that moment, I understood something Daniel didn't. This wasn't just betrayal. It was information. And information, handled correctly, changes outcomes. I didn't follow him. That was the first real decision I made that night. I stayed where I was, sitting alone at the kitchen table, listening to the faint sounds of drawers opening and closing in the bedroom. Daniel moved around like someone rehearsing normalcy, brushing his teeth, pacing, pretending this was just another argument we'd sleep off. My hands were steady. That frightened me more than shaking ever could. Anger came later. Pain came later. But first came something sharper. Assessment. I pushed the plate away, stood up, and leaned against the counter. My reflection in the darkened window looked unfamiliar. Eyes alert, jaw set, shoulders squared. I didn't look broken. I looked awake. When he came back out a few minutes later, his hair was tied back hastily, his face freshly washed. He'd changed into one of my old shirts, the one I wore around the house on lazy Sundays. It felt intentional. A visual plea for sympathy. "You're not saying anything meaningful," he muttered. "Do you even care about us?" I turned slowly. "I care," I said. "I'm just no longer confused." That irritated him. He wanted noise. He wanted chaos. He wanted reassurance disguised as anger. Instead, he got boundaries. "You don't get to confess betrayal and then demand comfort," I continued calmly. "Those two things don't coexist." His eyes narrowed. "You're being cold." "No," I corrected. I'm being precise, he scoffed, pacing once across the kitchen. So what now? You're just done? I didn't answer immediately, because this wasn't a declaration yet. It was a recalibration. I'm not making promises tonight, I said, and I'm not begging for explanations. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. That silence unsettled him. People who act without remorse rely on reaction to feel justified. My restraint left him exposed. He huffed, grabbed a glass of water, and leaned against the opposite counter. You're unbelievable, he muttered. I picked up my plate and walked past him to the sink. That's probably what your boss said too, I replied lightly, right before she crossed a professional boundary. That landed. His shoulders stiffened. He didn't respond. He turned and went back to the bedroom, slamming the door again, harder this time. I rinsed my plate slowly, loaded it into the dishwasher, and laughed, not hysterically, not bitterly, a quiet, surprised laugh, because for the first time in months, the fog had lifted. I wasn't scrambling to fix anything anymore. I wasn't negotiating reality. I was accepting it. Later, I heard him crying through the door, soft, muffled, controlled. I didn't go to him. I'd done that before, held him together when he cracked, absorbed guilt that wasn't mine, mistaken vulnerability for accountability. Not this time. Instead, I walked into my home office, opened my laptop, and created a document. A simple title, Operation New Beginning. It wasn't revenge. It was preparation. I listed shared accounts, assets, subscriptions, access points, not with rage, with clarity. By the time exhaustion pulled me onto the couch, the ache in my chest had dulled into something manageable. Not gone, but quiet. And quiet, this time, felt like control. Morning didn't arrive gently. It crept in through the blinds like an uninvited witness, illuminating everything I hadn't cleaned up, emotionally or otherwise. I woke on the couch with a stiff neck, a dry throat, and the unmistakable weight of reality pressing down on my ribs. For a brief, dangerous second, I almost forgot. Then memory returned. I slept with my boss. I'd do it again. There was no dramatic panic, no sobbing, just a slow, cold awareness settling into my bones. I checked the time. 7:13 a.m. I had less than an hour before Daniel would emerge from the bedroom, pretending last night hadn't permanently altered the architecture of our marriage. So I made coffee. Strong, bitter, functional. The smell filled the kitchen, but it didn't comfort me anymore. This wasn't a ritual now. It was fuel. When he finally appeared, hair tousled, expression neutral, wrapped in the confidence of someone who believed the worst part was already over, he spoke like nothing had happened. Coffee? He asked casually. I took a slow sip from my own cup. Oh, I said. You mean the one-night stand special? He blinked. Confusion crossed his face, followed quickly by irritation. I was drunk, he said defensively. It didn't mean anything. I set my mug down. Alcohol lowers inhibition, I replied. It doesn't invent new values. That's when the blame shifted. He said I'd been distant. He said work had changed me. He said he felt neglected. Each sentence stacked neatly into a familiar narrative. You made me do this. I listened without interrupting. Then I poured him a cup of coffee, black, no sugar, and placed it on the nightstand. Here, I said, consequences, served fresh. His jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. No, I answered. I'm being honest, for once. The silence stretched. Heavy. Loaded. He left for work shortly after, avoiding eye contact, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the walls. And something shifted inside me when the house went quiet. The silence didn't hurt anymore. It clarified. I spent the morning locking things down. Accounts. Passwords. Subscriptions. Not out of spite, but necessity. Trust had been broken. Access followed. When his mother called later that day, her voice was sharp with concern, but not for me. Daniel says you're overreacting, she said. You need to think about his career. Men make mistakes. I closed my eyes slowly. And women absorb them, I replied. until they don't. She hung up on me. That told me everything. By the afternoon, the pattern was undeniable. His family circled him. His friends excused him. And somehow, I was expected to stabilize what he detonated. That was the moment something inside me hardened. Not into bitterness, but resolve. I wasn't going to be the quiet, reasonable woman who made this easier for everyone else. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to document. By the time the sun set, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was preparing. And Daniel still had no idea how badly he'd underestimated my silence. That night, the house felt wrong. Not haunted, not dramatic, just hollow. Daniel didn't come home until after midnight. No message, no explanation. I didn't ask for one. I lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, listening to every unfamiliar sound like my body was bracing for impact that never came. When the bedroom door finally closed, I felt it. The finality. The realization that the man sleeping a few rooms away was no longer someone I could reach. That was the moment the loneliness hit. Not the loud kind, the quiet, internal kind that settles in your chest and refuses to move. I went into the bathroom, locked the door, and sat on the edge of the tub. The mirror reflected a woman I barely recognized. Eyes tired, face drawn, lips pressed tight like they were holding something back. I thought about everything I'd invested. Years. Patience. Compromise. Silence. I thought about every time I'd told myself, this is just a phase. And for the first time, the tears came. Not because he cheated, but because I'd stayed loyal to someone who had already emotionally left. I cried quietly, controlled, into a folded towel so no one would hear. Because even in private, I'd trained myself not to take up too much space. That realization hurt more than the betrayal. I wasn't just grieving a marriage. I was grieving the version of myself that believed endurance was the same as strength. I slept maybe 2 hours that night. In those hours, my mind replayed everything. His voice in the kitchen, his calm confession, the way his family dismissed me like collateral damage. By morning, exhaustion settled deep into my bones. I dragged myself to the kitchen, poured coffee I barely tasted, and sat alone at the table where everything had ended. The silence pressed in. For the first time since this started, doubt crept in. What if I was overreacting? What if I was throwing away years over one mistake? What if being alone was worse than being disrespected? Those thoughts scared me more than anything else. Because they sounded reasonable. That's how people stay. That's how they disappear inside their own lives. I realized then that this moment was the danger zone. Not his affair, not his excuses. I sat there until the coffee went cold, hands wrapped around the mug, breathing slowly, grounding myself. And somewhere between one breath and the next, something inside me whispered, "This is as low as it gets." And strangely, that brought clarity, because if this was the bottom, then the only direction left was up. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with paperwork. That morning, after the doubts of the night before finally loosened their grip, I opened my laptop again, not out of panic, but intention. I reread everything I'd already documented. Dates, times, account activity, messages. Daniel thought I'd never notice. Seeing it all laid out stripped the situation of emotion. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a pattern. And patterns don't deserve forgiveness. They deserve boundaries. For the first time since Daniel's confession, I stopped asking why. Why didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what now. I called Jake. He listened without interrupting, without minimizing, without trying to fix me. When I finished, he said one sentence that landed harder than any accusation. "You didn't lose him," he said. "He disqualified himself." That was it. That was the sentence. I sat there staring at my screen, realizing how much energy I'd wasted trying to be chosen by someone who had already opted out. Daniel wasn't confused. He was comfortable believing I wouldn't leave. That afternoon, I reviewed everything one last time and made the decision I'd been circling since the kitchen that night. I wasn't going to confront him again. I wasn't going to demand closure. I wasn't going to negotiate dignity. I was going to act. I booked a consultation with a divorce attorney, not emotionally, not impulsively, logically. When I walked into her office days later, I didn't feel broken. I felt prepared. She reviewed my documentation quietly, methodically, occasionally nodding. When she finally looked up, her expression was calm, but certain. "You're not here because your marriage failed," she said. "You're here because it ended." That distinction mattered. I signed nothing that day, but I left knowing exactly where I stood. That night, when Daniel came home late again, humming to himself like nothing had changed, I watched him with new eyes. He thought he still had time. He thought silence meant compliance. He didn't know I'd already moved on from asking permission. The power shift wasn't dramatic. It was internal, and once it happened, there was no going back. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It unraveled. Quietly. Methodically. Exactly the way lies always do when no one rushes in to save them. Daniel assumed nothing had changed. That was his second mistake. He kept coming home late, kept answering calls in low voices, kept carrying himself with the casual confidence of a man who believed the worst had already passed. What he didn't realize was that while he was still playing defense, I'd already stepped off the field. The attorney handled communication from that point forward. No arguments, no emotional appeals, just documents. When the papers were filed, Daniel didn't yell. He stared at them like they were written in another language. "You're really doing this?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I replied. "I already did." His family reacted exactly as expected. At first, disbelief, then anger, then distance. His mother called once more, not to ask how I was, but to ask if there was any way to keep this private. That told me everything. Friends stopped reaching out. Invitations disappeared. Conversations shifted when I entered a room. Not because I was wrong, because accountability makes people uncomfortable when they've already chosen sides. At work, things began to change for Daniel, too. Whispers. Meetings behind closed doors. A sudden drop in confidence. Affairs don't stay secret in professional environments. They metastasize. And when discretion is part of the job description, exposure comes with consequences. I didn't celebrate it. I didn't gloat. I watched from a distance as the life he'd assumed was untouchable began quietly closing its doors. The house became emptier, not lonelier, lighter. When Daniel finally moved his things out, there was no dramatic goodbye, no final confrontation. He packed quickly, avoided eye contact, left the key on the counter like a resignation letter. I didn't stop him. I didn't need to, because by then, the truth had already done the work for me, and I walked away without raising my voice once. The house didn't feel empty after Daniel left. It felt honest. For the first time in years, the silence didn't weigh on my chest. It didn't ask anything of me. It didn't demand compromise or explanation. It just existed. And so did I. Mornings became mine again. Coffee tasted better. Sleep came without anxiety. I, waking up, braced for disappointment. People asked if I regretted it, if I missed him, if I wished I'd fought harder. The truth? I don't regret leaving something that had already left me. What I regret is how long I stayed loyal to a version of love that required me to shrink. Healing wasn't dramatic. It was practical. I reclaimed routines. I reclaimed space. I reclaimed my name without attaching it to his choices. I learned that respect isn't something you earn by endurance. It's something that exists, or it doesn't. That love without honesty is just emotional labor. That trust without accountability is wishful thinking. That marriage without partnership is simply two people sharing expenses and silence. Daniel taught me what I don't want. My lawyer taught me what I deserve. My friends reminded me that support doesn't ask you to explain why you're hurt. And I learned, finally, that closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from deciding you're done carrying their damage. I'm not angry anymore. I'm free. And freedom, I've learned, is waking up without fear of the next betrayal. It's choosing yourself without apology. It's realizing that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is actually the thing that saves you. because it forces you to stop settling. This wasn't the end of my story. It was an upgrade. And for the first time in a long time, I'm good. Really, genuinely good.